Reports that when the system fails, families can pay the ultimate price.
We were right here by this tree. My son was right about here in this area.
In June 2017, at a family picnic in this park in Aurora, Colorado, Vanessa Peoples noticed that one of her young sons had slipped away.
You're maybe how far? This far away? What do you think?
Right here. This is my soon-to-be 8-year-old.
Peoples, who is studying to be a nurse, is not the first parent to take her eyes off a child. It happens all the time. But a bystander's call to police resulted in child abuse charges that have upended her life.
They treated me as if I really done harm to my children, and I didn't harm anyone.
A month after the picnic, a caseworker from the Adams County Children and Family Services came unannounced to her home.
That day I can never forget.
Peoples, who was downstairs doing laundry, didn't hear the doorbell, so again, police were called.
At that moment, I'm coming up the stairs thinking I'm going to get my kids, and I have a gun pointed in my face.
Even when it was clear the children were not home alone, the police didn't leave.
Damn! The door ain't getting closed right now.
What happened next is not easy to watch.
Watch out, hey, behind you.
When Peoples objected to the way police treated her mother, who had just come home, officers physically restrained her.
Stay back.
Get your goddamn head up on my throat.
Partially dislocating her shoulder in the process.
When the officer had slammed me down on the floor, I looked my son dead in his face, and it was just the look of pain. I was treated like an animal. I wasn't treated like a human being.
What's your name?
I don't know.
Peoples, who had no criminal history, was taken to jail, charged with child abuse and obstructing an officer.
The part that really got to me, I seen the look on that social worker's face when it happened. And she didn't say anything. She just stood there.
There are certainly times where the state needs to be involved. This was not even approaching one of those cases.
Erica Grossman, a civil rights lawyer, sued the Aurora police on Peoples' behalf, accusing officers of excessive force.
Was there any indication that there were weapons inside the home?
No, there was absolutely zero indication.
A police internal investigation determined that the use of force was lawful, but the department settled the case, and the charge against Peoples for obstruction was dropped. Still, the one alleging child abuse was not.
Once you ring the bell of the state, it's a tragedy. You can't unring it. It's almost impossible to get out of that.
Colorado child welfare officials say they cannot discuss the case, but that the violence that Peoples experienced is unusual. Still, what happened next is not. Peoples was required to follow a strict service plan, much at her own expense, and allow twice-weekly inspections by caseworkers.
I had to pay for a drug test. I had to pay for parenting classes. I also had to pay to be on probation.
Unless the treatment of a child makes headlines, for example, when a child dies, Americans rarely think about the agencies charged with child protection. So the system that handles more than 3.5 million cases a year gets little public scrutiny, in part because the people most affected are poor.
Part of the propaganda that this system uses to convince the public that it's actually a benevolent, caring system is the very terms that are used to describe it. Child welfare, foster care, child protection.
University of Pennsylvania professor Dorothy Roberts has written extensively about the child protection system.
I prefer the term family policing system because that really describes what the system does: to investigate, to accuse, to tear apart.
And the numbers don't lie, says Roberts. Black families are twice as likely as white families to be impacted.
More than half of Black children in America will be subjected to a child welfare investigation at some point before they reach age 18.
The care of poor or abandoned children used to be handled by private charities and orphanages. But when the growing use of x-rays in the 1960s revealed that children were suffering abuse at home, the government got involved. Today, fewer than 20% of cases allege actual physical abuse. The great majority involve neglect.
Neglect is usually confused with poverty. Neglect is defined by most states as parents failing to provide the resources that children need, like clothing or food or secure housing. And those are usually caused because parents simply can't afford them.
Every 2 minutes, a child is removed from his or her home. There are now more than 400,000 children in foster care.
Would you agree there are probably some cases of neglect where extreme poverty or a parent with a terrible drug problem, kids would be better off in another environment?
Yes, of course there are cases, and again, these are extreme cases. But first of all, this system doesn't spend enough attention or resources on what could be given to that family to keep it together.
Your life completely changed because of one night, didn't it?
Yep, one dumb mistake that I literally wish I could take back every single day.
In the summer of 2017, Samantha Moonguy was a 22-year-old single mom of a 4-year-old girl living in Missouri, struggling to pay rent and child care.
We had gotten behind on rent, and so they gave us an eviction notice. If you don't pay on this date, you have to leave.
Moonguy, who danced at a club at night, says she couldn't find a babysitter and left her daughter in the apartment alone. Samantha, you had to know how risky that was.
Oh, yeah.
There could be a fire. She could get sick, and she was alone.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have just not gone to work that night.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but then we would have been evicted. And then what do I do next?
When she got home that morning, she discovered her child had gone to a neighbor's apartment, who called police. The child was placed in foster care. Moonguy agreed to follow a plan to get her back. How often were you able to see her?
Once a week. That's not enough.
Although records show her daughter struggled to adjust to foster care, Moonguy was never allowed to spend time alone with her or bring her home.
What we have as a system now is a system that's responding to harm and inflicting an intervention on those children in a way that causes further harm.
Alan Detloff, Dean of Social Work at the University of Houston, was once a child protection caseworker himself. He says that service plans often set parents up for failure.
They have to go to counseling, they have to go to parenting classes. When parents would say, I can't take this much time off work to go to these classes, and the caseworker will say to the parents, well, this is about your child. That should be your priority. You need to figure it out.
In Moonguy's case, she was also required to pay child support payments to the county to reimburse them for the foster care. And soon, weeks away from her daughter became months, and then a year and a half. When parents are required to pay child support, doesn't it also increase the amount of time the child is away from the parent?
Absolutely, and that's not what we want either.
Asia Schomburg is Associate Commissioner for the U.S. Children's Bureau. This past summer, her office recommended that state and county agencies stop charging struggling parents for foster care. But it's not enough, says Professor Roberts. She and others say the entire system needs to change.
This system is a $30 billion system. It would be so much more beneficial for children to take those $30+ billion and give it directly to families for meeting their children's needs, to spend it on housing, on clothing, on food, on medical care.
What do you say to people who say the system needs to be completely dismantled?
We don't want 400,000 children in foster care. There may be children and families out there that need the help and are getting the help that they need.
But these agencies wield great power over families' lives.
Let me show you how to do one.
Yeah, the big one.
Moongai, who now also has a 4-year-old son, says she believed she'd get her daughter back.